Hey, and welcome to the first episode of Junk Food News. Junk Food News is going to be a look back at this month's news articles about junk food, candy, that sort of thing. And if you want to read any more about these or learn any more about any of the things that we discuss on junk food in the news, you can go to the candycritic.org and just either look up our Twitter feed or our Facebook page. All the links that we're going to be talking about on this episode of Junk Food News come from the January section of either our Twitter page or Facebook page. We started off January looking at some crazy things that are dropped on New Year's. There's some kind of cool candy-related things. There's a giant Peep that's dropped. I believe that's near the Peep factory. Apparently someplace drops a giant moon pie. And of course, Hershey, Pennsylvania drops a giant Hershey Kiss. One of the other things that we were looking at is there's an interesting article we came across about desserts at restaurants. And a few people researched this and discovered that desserts are actually financially the best deal that you can get at a restaurant. If you double up on dessert, you're actually getting a bargain. One of the series that I've been looking at recently and posting a lot about is this series from Serious Eats called The Comfort Food Diaries. The first one that they posted is about movie theater popcorn. And basically, all these are essays by various writers and editors and such about sort of the love of certain foods and the memories that they bring out. And they're these little love notes to food. It's really fascinating. The first one that they posted, again, I said was about popcorn, but they did one about peanut butter and jam, which was really fascinating. And they've done some about some other foods as well, but really a fascinating read. Highly recommend it. We sort of have a comforting read about food. It's a really great series. One of the interesting articles we came across was about food and the visual aspect of food. And apparently there was a researcher. They were talking about how in New York City, apparently in 2004, food did not look as sort of visually stunning as it does now. So in the last 10 years, our eyes have become, it's always been an important part, but it's become even a bigger part of our eating lives. It's probably something to do with the fact that people like to take pictures of their food when they're eating at restaurants. So maybe that's it. Another interesting sort of sciencey article we came across was about being hangry. Sort of a new expression that sort of been taking over the world lately. For those unfamiliar with it, means when you're so hungry that you actually get kind of grumpy. And because this expression has sort of taken off, there's been a bit of media about it, and apparently there is science behind being hangry, and it is a real thing. The other thing we came across that's interesting science-wise is about maple syrup. There was a group of Canadian scientists that were doing some research into the contents of maple syrup, and apparently they found that maple syrup might actually, a compound in maple syrup, might actually go on to cure cancer. So there's still some more research that has to be done about it, and for all we know, you may owe us Canadians a great deal of thanks, because our maple syrup may save the world of cancer. That'd be amazing. There was also an interesting article early on about a Taiwanese McDonald's. Apparently they dress up in cosplay sometimes for certain events, and a few of them have picked some rather, let's say, sketchy costumes, and so there's apparently been a problem with that. It's too bad, because I think the idea of wearing costumes at a McDonald's, that'd be really neat to see people all dressed up. But I guess it really would depend on what they're dressed up as. Geekology posted an interesting article that we posted about a $100 donut that's apparently iced with Cristal champagne, is covered in 24 karat gold. I'm not a big fan of these sort of overpriced snacks because I find that they don't really tend to actually be any better, and it's more just sort of an ego boost thing. But, kind of fascinating anyway to read about. Ben & Jerry's producing a Bernie Sanders flavor of ice cream. Apparently it's all chocolate on the top, and you got to dig down to the bottom and mush it around to get to the real meat of the ice cream. I'm not really following American politics right now, but I'm sure those of you that are probably find that hilarious. Found this one article about the World's Fair, the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis. And it was a place where a lot of inventions in food were sort of said to premiere including the waffle cone for an ice cream cone, a hot dog. These foods that we consider normal were actually something brand new during this World's Fair and were premiered there. This fair is often considered sort of the birthplace of sort of traditional foods that, sort of the classic foods we eat today. But there's a bit of argument about whether or not, they actually started there or whether it was just sort of showcased there for the first time. There's a really fascinating article on Serious Eats about that we have linked up. Also, earlier in the month, Vans released junk food themed shoes. Those were kind of fun. I wasn't a big fan of the foods that they had. This is an interesting article I read about the Hershey Hotel. I only say this is fascinating because I'm actually planning a road trip and I'm thinking about a stop in Hershey. And I was actually looking at staying at the Hershey Hotel, but this hotel actually was a prison for 8 Nazi collaborators. And there's an interesting sort of history about it. I mean, it's you wouldn't think of the Hershey Hotel as being something to do with war or being a prison, but for the time being, it had to be one. And it's a very fascinating article in the Atlantis Obscura. Again, you can find all these links on our Twitter feed and Facebook page. We have another sort of fascinating article about food on Mars. Some of the, with the Mars exploration thing coming up and everybody thinking about traveling to Mars, the food that people eat on these trips is a very important part of it. A lot of people are talking about, how NASA is doing science about how to grow food, but when they first settle there, they're going to have to eat what they have. Lettuce takes time to grow. Setting up the farms takes time. So there's apparently there's an interesting article on our feed about how they're going to sort of set them up with food right off the bat, and whether or not they're going to be eating pastes or whether or not the meals are actually going to be okay. And from what it sounds like, there's going to be some great meals on there. Another sort of funny article that came up was all the different states recently. There's been this whole craze about creating emojis for states and for different areas, and apparently Philadelphia cheesesteak is now an official emoji that one can download. I'm not really sure what one would sort of put, like what sentence would require Philadelphia steak emoji at the end, but I don't know. It seems pretty interesting. There's a few other food items I'd like to see. Maybe a Kit Kat emoji, and Candy Critic should have their own emojis. This is something I should think about. One of the interesting things that's sort of come up, particularly near the end of January, is I've found an amazing amount of articles about pies. Pies really seem to be making a bit of a comeback, in particular old school flavors of pie. Like there seems to be this thing about retro pies and pie flavors, and so I'm not going to make this prediction 100%, but I see the possibility that pies may be the next cupcake, and quite frankly, I couldn't be happier about that because I do love pies. One of the interesting things that we came across this month was apparently somebody has now released a special edition Stay Puft Marshmallow Man marshmallow scented candle, and I just think that's great. I'd love to take that, build little buildings, and reenact my favorite scene from Ghostbusters using one of these Stay Puft Marshmallow Man candles, and I imagine it smells fantastic. One of the interesting restaurant things we came across was Japan has just released a new topping for their French fries. I've tried ketchup and mayonnaise, but now in Japan you can get chocolate for your French fries, so why not turn that potatoy treat into a wonderful dessert? I joke about that, but actually as a kid, I used to dip my French fries in chocolate milkshake, and I always enjoyed that. Probably a weird quirk, but apparently I'm not that weird, or, well, not as weird as your average Japanese food eater. Another fascinating article I came across was an article all about Studio Ghibli movies. If you're not familiar with them, it's a Japanese movie studio that produced some pretty amazing things. Some pretty amazing movies include Spirited Away, Kiki's Delivery Service, My Neighbor Totoro. Somebody produced a collection of recipes all about the foods that they eat in these movies, because the foods they're an important part, but they're also they're just illustrated so well, and it's really a good look at Japanese cooking and food. And if you're a fan of these movies, this is a great way to possibly, when you're watching one of these movies, make yourself a little something rather than just the regular popcorn. That would make you sort of feel a little bit more into the movie. Finally, we're going to talk about 1947 Canada. In 1947, a bunch of kids went on strike. And they went on strike because candy bar prices went up. Chocolate bars went from 5 to 8 cents. And the local kids were just appalled by this and decided to go on strike. And the Futility Closet posted an absolutely amazing podcast of their own on the subject of this strike, and it's definitely worth a listen. And it's great to see that these kids stood up for themselves and brought down the man and brought down candy bar prices. That's about all the news that we have up until this point. Thanks again for listening to Junk Food News. This will be happening at the end of every month, where I'll talk about what happened in news of junk food and candy, as well as some of the things happening on Candy Critic for the next month. Thanks for listening.